Most of us don't have much power with our bosses, but when Formula One drivers talk, a lot of people listen. Lewis Hamilton and other drivers were unhappy about the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. But what exactly happened there? Why couldn't the race be stopped? And how did the entire staff almost get held hostage? Stay tuned because all of that and more is coming right up. A missile strike! In the build-up to the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix, the biggest news had nothing to do with the drivers or the cars. Instead, there was a real danger. On March 25th, when the second practice session was running, there was an attack on an oil storage facility just 10 miles away from the circuit. Many drivers were out on the track at the time, and Max Verstappen asked over his radio if the car was on fire because he smelled burning. He was told by his race engineer that smoke was coming from outside the circuit. Not long after, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, and other big names were forced to return to the garages as the session was stopped. The attack was claimed by a Yemen group and is part of the ongoing war in Yemen. Big clouds of smoke could be seen from the circuit in official pictures and videos of the Grand Prix, showing just how close it was. Despite the attack, Formula One said that the race was going ahead as planned and that Saudi Arabia has guaranteed the highest level of security for the drivers, staff, and audience members. All the team principals were called into a meeting, and after discussions, they all agreed that the race should continue. They were happy with the assurances that were given to them by Saudi officials and race organizers. Total Wolff said that the circuit was actually the safest place in Saudi Arabia at the time. All the team bosses agreed that the race should continue. The drivers resist, but the drivers had their own concerns. After all, it's these guys who are out on the track and the most vulnerable, so it's only fair that they are listened to. Formula One tried to manage the situation to stop it from getting out of hand. First, everyone was called into a meeting with F1 CEO Stefano Domenicali. Before long, the team bosses left the meeting and told the media they were unanimous in their decision to go ahead with the weekend. But when asked about it, Total Wolff said that it was only unanimous between the team principals and didn't say anything about the drivers. After that, the drivers continued to discuss the issue between themselves. This was the Grand Prix Drivers Association, or GDPA for short, which is set up to talk about and resolve issues that affect the drivers. According to reports, many of the drivers did not want to race. Lewis Hamilton could be seen talking to the rest of the drivers, but as it dragged on, team principals joined them in the drivers' meeting and they had a long discussion. They finally agreed that they should continue with the race weekend, but at this point, it was well after midnight and definitely past their bedtime. They still had the qualifying sessions the next day and needed to be at their best. After the meeting on Saturday, all media events were canceled that included pre-race interviews. This meant that drivers couldn't really give their thoughts on what was going on, and people were starting to worry. The race goes ahead. After all of the confusion, debates, and long meetings, the race finally got underway, and maybe it was all worth it. It was a nail-biting race that was decided in the last lap. The Red Bull of Sergio Perez won pole position in qualifying, followed by championship leader Charles Leclerc and world champion Max Verstappen down in 4th place. 6 cars were retired from either collisions or mechanical problems, and the safety cars turned out to be a big factor in the race. But after a few lead changes, it was Leclerc and Verstappen who were battling it out up front. Just like the first round in Bahrain, they had some close wheel-to-wheel racing that kept everyone guessing. It looked like Leclerc might be able to hold the Red Bull behind him until Verstappen passed him with just a few laps to go to take the victory by just a half a second. It didn't look like the drivers were too affected by the danger they were in that weekend, but after all, they are professional. If that's how Leclerc and Verstappen perform when they are distracted, we can't wait to see them at their best. How did the entire staff of the Grand Prix almost get held hostage? And what did Toto Wolff say after the race that landed him in hot water? So don't go anywhere to find out. No need to worry. We know that none of the team's principals or drivers are trained like politicians, but unfortunately for them, they were dropped right into a political nightmare. Toto Wolff said after the attack that for most viewers, a terrorist attack so close to an event would be unacceptable. But in Saudi Arabia, it is very different to Western cultures, and these things were normal. These comments were criticized after Formula One canceled the contract to race in Russia earlier in the year. The reason for canceling was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All the drivers posed for photos before the Bahrain Grand Prix wearing shirts that said "No War" in front of Ukrainian flag. McLaren team principal Andrea Seidel said that it was an opportunity for the sport to have a positive impact on Saudi Arabia and the culture there. 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel agreed. He said that it was a chance for F1 to represent Western values. Formula One has been a great way to introduce different cultures to a global audience, and it's what makes the sport so great. But having danger around a racetrack takes its toll on the drivers and everyone involved. After the weekend, Lewis Hamilton said that he was just happy to go home. Young McLaren star Lando Norris agreed and said that it was a nervous place to be, especially when you're expected to perform. It's hard enough to drive a Formula One car in normal conditions. Now imagine trying to concentrate with missiles flying in the air. Post-race, what's it all about? Money, of course. It was speculated by some journalists that it was too difficult for Formula One to get out of the contract they have with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has committed to a deal potentially worth $900 million for Formula One. That's a lot of money. And if you know anything about F1, then you know it is built on money. But the standoff between the drivers and F1 over the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix may lead to something positive. Lewis Hamilton said after the race that that there was a lot of work to do to include the drivers more in decisions and to have their concerns heard by Formula One management. He also said that he stood by his position in 2021 that didn't feel comfortable racing in Saudi Arabia. Hamilton has criticized the country for its human rights records and treatment of minority groups. And you know it's serious when Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen agree on something, especially after last year. But they did agree on how the drivers' concerns should be heard more. Verstappen said that after this weekend, all the drivers will sit together and speak to F1. The two rivals clearly put their differences aside when it came to the safety of everyone involved in the Grand Prix. That's much more mature than many of their fans. Sports washing. Even before the missile attacks, Formula One has been criticized for holding a race in Saudi Arabia. The country has been very controversial for human rights issues, the murder of a journalist, and the ongoing war in Yemen. But Saudi Arabia brings in a lot of money. The state's oil companies, Aramco, is the main sponsor that is worth more than $450 million. So it's easy to see why they didn't want to rock the boat too much. And F1 may have been looking at how previous disagreements with Saudi Arabia had gone. In 2019, World Wrestling Entertainment, or WWE, held a show there as part of a multi-year agreement. But after the stream was cut short, there were some problems with the government. Apparently, the Saudi government had failed to pay WWE for previous events, and because of this, the staff and performers of the event were kept in their plane on the tarmac for 6 hours. One journalist said they were held hostage in a really tense situation. The official reason for the delay was mechanical reasons, but it caused performers to miss an event that was scheduled to take place the next day back in the US. Some on social media fear that Formula One personnel may be treated the same if they refuse to go ahead with the race. Luckily, everyone returned home safely, and they were soon all getting ready for the Australian Grand Prix a couple weeks later. What a weekend that was, and what a weekend it could have been. Do you think the race in Saudi Arabia should have gone ahead? Is Formula One only concerned with money? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.